Come on, Thomas, don't be such a chicken, taunted Mark, his eyes glinting with mischief in the flickering firelight. The flames cast a dance of shadows across the faces of the 6 friends huddled around the campfire, the only source of warmth in the crisp, autumnal night. I'm not scared, Thomas protested, his voice betraying the tremor in his chest. It's just, this place gives me the creeps. He glanced over his shoulder into the surrounding darkness of the forest, where the tall trees loomed like silent giants, their branches whispering secrets in the breeze. You're not still hung up on those old campfire stories, are you? Laura, the most skeptical of the group, rolled her eyes. We're in the middle of nowhere, sure, but it's just a camping trip. Nothing's going to happen. Yet, Thomas, it's all just fun and games, chuckled Alex, throwing another log on the fire. The wood crackled and spit, sending sparks shooting into the night sky. The group laughed, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled over them like a thick blanket of fog. The laughter slowly dissipated as the night grew colder, and the friends decided to tell their own ghost stories. Each tale grew more macabre than the last, and the shadows around the campfire seemed to thicken with every eerie word spoken. The crackling of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl were the only sounds that pierced the stillness. Summary 1. Mark challenges Thomas's courage around the campfire, but Thomas feels uneasy. Laura dismisses his fears as irrational, while Alex feeds the fire. The group tells increasingly scary ghost stories, with the shadows thickening and the atmosphere growing colder. Emma shivered, pulling her sweatshirt tighter around herself. Okay, enough. I've had my fill of scary stories for one night. She tossed a handful of marshmallows into the flames, watching as they sizzled and turned a ghostly white. What's got you so spooked? Mark teased, reaching over to ruffle her hair. You're the one who suggested we come out here. Thomas spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe we shouldn't have. His gaze drifted to the edge of the clearing, where the darkness was especially thick. As the night deepened, so did the unspoken tension among the friends. They had all heard the whispers of the old legend about the forest they had chosen for their trip, the one about the vengeful spirits that were said to roam these very woods. They had dismissed it as a campfire yarn, but now, with the sounds of the night growing more ominous, doubt began to nibble at the edges of their bravado. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves and sending a chill down their spines. Rachel's voice was barely audible when she spoke. Guys, do you hear that? The group fell silent, straining to listen over the sudden crescendo of the fire. From the distance came the unmistakable sound of twigs snapping underfoot. Something was moving out there, and it wasn't the wind. The hairs on the back of their necks stood on end as the noises grew closer. Summary 1. The friends start to feel spooked after their ghost stories, especially when Thomas points out they're in the forest rumored to have vengeful spirits. The tension builds as they hear something moving in the woods, and the sounds grow closer. Thomas's heart raced as he reached for the flashlight next to him. The beam of light cut through the darkness, searching for the source of the disturbance. It was then that they saw it, a pair of glowing eyes, staring back at them from the edge of the clearing. Everyone froze, their laughter and chatter forgotten. The eyes didn't blink, they just hovered there, floating in the shadows. The air grew thick with fear, and the fire's warmth seemed to retreat into the very embers. What the hell is that? James whispered, his hand tightening around his beer can. It's probably just a deer, Laura said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The eyes remained unblinking, and the sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered and went out, plunging them into absolute darkness. The only light now came from the dying embers of the fire, casting just enough of a glow to reveal the panic etched on each of their faces. The footsteps grew louder, heavier, and the sound of something dragging across the ground joined the rhythm. "Thomas, you've got the flashlight," Rachel whispered urgently, her voice trembling. Thomas fumbled with the switch, his hands slick with cold sweat. When the light finally came back on, the eyes were gone, but the footsteps continued, now accompanied by a low guttural growl that seemed to emanate from all around them. "We need to get out of here," Alex said, his voice a mix of terror and determination. The group hastily began to pack their things, tossing their supplies into their backpacks without care. The forest floor grew uneven as they stumbled away from the clearing, their eyes glued to the beam of light that bobbed erratically with each step. The growling grew louder, closer, and it was joined by an eerie wailing that sent shivers down their spines. "It's coming from the left," Mark whispered, his eyes darting into the trees. "No, it's behind us," corrected James, his voice cracking. The friends realized with horror that the sound was coming from all around them, as if the very forest itself had turned against them. They broke into a run, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Branches slapped at their faces and thorns tore at their clothes, but they didn't dare slow down. The wailing grew to a crescendo, and the ground began to shake beneath their feet. Thomas tripped over an exposed root, crying out as he fell. The others kept running, but the sound of the creature, or creatures, grew closer. He scrambled to his feet, adrenaline pumping through his veins, and sprinted after the fading lights of his friends' flashlights. Suddenly, the forest fell silent. The wailing ceased, the footsteps stopped. The only sound was the frantic panting of their own breaths, and the hammering of their hearts in their chests. They stopped running, panting and wheezing, leaning against trees for support. Thomas caught up, his eyes wide with terror. "What was that?" he gasped. The others just looked at him, their expressions a mirror of his own fear. Laura was the first to speak. "I don't know, but we can't stay here." The friends moved as one, their flashlights piercing the darkness as they continued their desperate search for safety, for civilization, for anything that would take them away from this haunted place that had become their nightmare. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the chase. Each step they took echoed through the trees like a taunt, reminding them they weren't alone. The air grew colder, and a scent of damp earth and decaying leaves grew stronger, suffocating them with every inhale. The ground beneath them began to slope, leading them downhill towards an unknown destination. Laura stumbled, her flashlight rolling away. "Damn it," she muttered, reaching for it. As she bent down, the others shone their lights around, revealing a set of ancient stone steps, overgrown with moss and vines, leading into the bowels of the forest. "We can't go down there," Thomas panted, his voice trembling. "It's not natural." But the choice was made for them when a chilling wind picked up, carrying with it the unmistakable sound of the wailing spirits. The trees groaned as if in pain, and the leaves danced a maddening ballet around them. The only escape was down the ancient stairs, into the heart of the darkness. With no other option, they descended the mossy steps, their feet slipping and sliding on the uneven stones. The air grew colder, the ground spongy, as if they were treading on the very lungs of the earth. Laura's light flickered erratically, throwing eerie shadows across the steps that seemed to stretch on forever. "It's like we're in a grave," Rachel whispered, her voice tight with fear. The others didn't respond. They were too busy trying to control their own rising panic. The wailing grew fainter, replaced by a soft, almost soothing, humming that seemed to resonate in their very bones. As they reached the bottom, they found themselves in a clearing, surrounded by a ring of ancient, twisted trees. In the center stood a dilapidated structure, the remnants of an old cabin. Its wooden frame groaned under the weight of the years, and the windows were like gaping, sightless eyes. "This is it," Alex murmured. "This is where the legend starts." "Let's just keep going," James suggested. "We need to find a way out of here." But their words were drowned out by the sudden, deafening roar that seemed to come from within the cabin. The earth trembled, and the trees around them began to sway violently. The friends stumbled back, their flashlights jerking around the clearing like lost beacons. The cabin door creaked open, and from within, a figure emerged. It was tall, too tall to be human, with elongated limbs that moved in unnatural ways. Its face was obscured by a hood, but the glow of its eyes pierced the darkness. The friends backed away, their hearts racing as the creature lurched towards them. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, a manifestation of their deepest fears, brought to terrifying life. Thomas took a step forward, his hand shaking as he pointed the flashlight directly at the creature. "What do you want from us?" he demanded, trying to sound braver than he felt. The creature paused, its head tilting to one side as if considering his words. And then it spoke. The voice was like the rustle of dead leaves, the crackle of a fire, and the whisper of the wind, all rolled into one. "You brought the darkness upon yourselves," it rasped. "Now you shall face the price." Panic set in. The friends turned and ran, their flashlights casting wild, erratic patterns across the ground as they sprinted back towards the stairs. But the path had changed. The trees had closed in, and the steps were gone. They were trapped in the clearing with the creature, which was now advancing on them with a disturbing grace. Their eyes met in silent understanding. They had to stand their ground. Laura took a deep breath and stepped forward, her flashlight steady in her hand. "Leave us alone," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. The creature halted, its eyes boring into hers, and then it threw back its hood, revealing a face that was both beautiful and terrifying, a face that seemed to hold the very essence of the forest itself. The friends' fear transformed into awe as the creature spoke again. "You seek to leave, yet you brought the darkness with you. Only by facing it will you find your way home." The air grew thick with an energy they couldn't quite explain, a mix of dread and fascination. The creature raised a hand, and the fireflies that had been flitting around the clearing gathered, forming a swirling cloud of light that grew brighter and brighter until it was blinding. As the light faded, the friends found themselves standing before a mirror, ancient and tarnished, set into the trunk of one of the gnarled trees. Laura reached out a tentative hand to touch it, and her reflection rippled like water. The others gathered around, their own reflections distorted, twisted versions of themselves. Thomas took a deep breath and stepped closer. "What is this?" he asked, his voice echoing in the clearing. The creature's eyes, now human, filled with sadness. "This is the mirror of reflection. It shows not just your image, but the darkness within." One by one, the friends stepped forward, their fear replaced by curiosity. Each saw something different in the mirror, a regret, a guilt, a fear that had been festering in their hearts. They stared, transfixed, as the reflections began to take form, reaching out from the glass to envelop them in a cold, dark embrace. The creature spoke softly. "You must face what you see and conquer it. Only then can you leave this place." They looked at each other, understanding dawning on their faces. Laura took Thomas's hand, and together they stepped back from the mirror, drawing strength from each other. The others followed suit, forming a tight circle around the tree. The creature watched them, its expression unreadable. "You have chosen to stand together," it said. "Now you must stand against the darkness." The wailing grew louder, the trees shuddered, and the air grew colder still. But the friends held their ground, their grip on each other's hands, a silent pact of unity. The creature raised its arms, and the mirror shattered into 1,000 shards, the darkness that had been trapped within it spilling out like a malevolent fog. The friends braced themselves, ready to face whatever nightmares the forest threw at them. One by one, the shadows took form, solidifying into monstrous shapes that reflected their deepest fears. Laura faced a creature that whispered her darkest secrets, while Mark battled a beast that mirrored his own anger. Rachel's fear of abandonment took the form of a specter that reached out with icy fingers. Thomas's heart raced as he saw a creature that embodied his fear of inadequacy, taunting him, telling him he would always be the one to fall behind. But as he stared into its eyes, something shifted. He felt a surge of determination, a refusal to let fear define him. With a roar of defiance, Thomas charged the creature, his friends following suit. The clearing erupted into chaos as they fought the shadows of their own making. The forest trembled with the force of their combined wills, the ancient trees bearing witness to a battle that was as much internal as it was external. Slowly, the darkness began to recede. The creatures wavered, their forms becoming less solid. With a final, desperate push, the friends destroyed their inner demons, the shards of the mirror piercing the creatures and dissolving them into nothingness. The creature, now human in appearance, watched them with a hint of pride. "You have faced the darkness," it said. "Now, you may leave." They turned to the spot where the stairs had been, and there they were again, leading them back to the world they knew. They ascended, hand in hand, leaving the clearing and the creature behind. As they emerged from the forest into the moonlit night, the tension in their bodies began to ease. They looked back at the trees, now silent and still, and realized that their campfire was still burning, a beacon in the distance. They walked back to their camp, the adrenaline slowly wearing off, leaving them drained and shaken. The fire looked like a lifeline, a beacon of warmth and familiarity, amidst the cold, eerie silence of the forest that had tried to consume them. Their laughter had turned to gasps, their smiles to grimaces, and the memories of their carefree banter now felt like echoes from another world. As they approached the fire, they noticed that their camp looked untouched, as if the horrors they had just faced had never existed. The marshmallows were still roasting on sticks, the beer cans remained uncrushed under the weight of their earlier grips, and their tents stood tall and unblemished. But they knew that everything had changed. The forest had shown them a side of themselves they had never wanted to see, and they couldn't just pack up and pretend it had all been a bad dream. They sat around the fire, not speaking, the warmth doing little to thaw the cold that had settled into their bones. The flickering light danced across their faces, revealing the shadows of the recent ordeal. Each friend stared into the flames, lost in their own thoughts, their eyes haunted by the reflections of the night's events. Thomas broke the silence. "What the hell was that?" His voice was hoarse from screaming and the harshness of the night air. Laura looked up, her eyes wide. I think it was us, our fears, our secrets, our darkness. That's what the creature meant." The others nodded solemnly. They had faced not only the terrors of the forest, but the demons within themselves, and survived. It was a bond none of them could ever forget, a shared nightmare that had forged them into something stronger, something unbreakable. They decided to stay the rest of the night, huddled around the fire, their flashlights casting weak circles of light into the surrounding woods. The forest had shown them its teeth, but they had stood firm, and it had backed down. As the first light of dawn began to break through the canopy, the friends finally found the courage to crawl into their tents and attempt to sleep. The night had been long, and the horrors of the forest felt like a distant memory, a feverish nightmare that had lost its power in the face of the new day. But as they lay there, listening to the first birds of morning begin their symphony, they realized that the story of their camping trip had changed. It was no longer just a weekend of fun and games. It was now the story of how they had faced the darkest parts of themselves and come out the other side. And with that realization, a strange peace settled over them, a quiet understanding that they had been through something that would stay with them forever. They had survived the most horror-filled night of their lives, and as the sun began to rise, they knew that the forest would never seem the same again. The darkness was gone, at least for now, but the memory of their victory over it would remain etched in their minds, a testament to the strength of their friendship and their collective refusal to be conquered by fear. The following day, as they broke camp and made their way back to civilization, they talked little of the events of the night before. The light of day made it easier to dismiss the shadows that had chased them as figments of their overactive imaginations. But the occasional glance at the mirror-like surface of a puddle or the rustle of a leaf in the breeze was enough to send a shiver down their spines, a reminder of the night's terrors. Back in the safety of their homes, they went about their lives, trying to shake off the lingering dread that clung to them like the forest's mist. Yet each found themselves looking over their shoulders, jumping at shadows, and hearing whispers of the wailing spirits in the quiet moments before sleep. The forest had left its mark, a scar that would never fully heal. But as time passed and the horrors of that night grew faint, the bond between them grew stronger. They had faced the most primal of fears and come out the other side, forever changed but not broken. The camping trip had been a crucible, forging their friendship into something that could withstand even the darkest of nights. And so, the legend of the haunted forest grew, whispered around other campfires and shared in hushed tones by those who had heard their story. But Thomas and his friends knew the truth. It wasn't the forest that was haunted. It was the darkness within themselves that had tried to claim them, and it was their own reflections in the mirror of reflection that had been the most terrifying specters of all. Years later, when they gathered to reminisce about that fateful trip, the laughter was genuine, the smiles warm. They had faced their fears and lived to tell the tale, and in doing so, they had learned something invaluable. They had learned that the most terrifying things in life weren't always the monsters that lurked in the shadows, but the demons that dwelled in their own hearts. The forest remained a part of them, a part of their shared history, a symbol of the night they had stared into the abyss and found their way back. And though they never returned to those woods, the lesson they had learned remained, a beacon of hope that shone through the darkest of times. For they knew that together they could face any horror the world threw at them, armed with nothing but their flashlights and the unshakable bond of friendship that had been forged in the fires of fear. Months after the incident, Thomas would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, the wailing spirits echoing in his ears, the glowing eyes haunting his dreams. He'd sit up in bed, heart pounding, and reach for his phone, the blue light a comforting reminder of the modern world. He'd scroll through the news, seeking normalcy in the mundane, but even as he scrolled, he couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was still watching, still waiting. Laura found herself drawn to the study of mythology and ancient lore, seeking understanding in the stories of other cultures that mirrored their own. Rachel took up hiking, pushing herself to conquer the trails she had once feared, conquering her inner demons one step at a time. James, the skeptic, found solace in science, searching for explanations that could rationalize the irrational. Alex, ever the joker, turned his experience into a campfire story, spinning tall tales of their encounter, each retelling more fantastical than the last. Yet when the laughter died down and the fire burned low, There was a seriousness in his eyes that spoke of the truth that lay beneath the embellishments. The creature, the mirror, the darkness, it was all real to him, and he knew that it was a part of him now, a part of all of them. The friends grew apart over the years, their lives diverging like the paths they had taken in the forest that night. Yet when they reunited, the bond was as strong as ever, the memory of their shared horror a secret handshake that only they understood. They had survived the most terrifying night of their lives, and in doing so, had found a piece of themselves that could never be lost. And though the forest had changed them, it had not destroyed them. It had made them stronger, wiser, and forever bound by the shadows of the past. Years later, when they were older, with families of their own, they gathered their children around a campfire of their own making. The kids' eyes grew wide with excitement as they listened to the tale of the haunted woods, of the creature and the mirror that had tested their parents' courage. The adults watched them, their faces a mix of nostalgia and a hint of fear, knowing that the forest was still out there, waiting. Thomas, now a father, took a deep breath as he finished the story. His own children stared at him, wide-eyed and silent. "But remember," he said softly, "the darkness is not just in the woods, it's inside all of us. And if you face it together, if you stand strong with those you love, you can conquer it." The campfire crackled, sending sparks into the night sky. The children looked around, their young minds trying to grasp the gravity of the story, the unspoken lessons it contained. And as they drifted off to sleep, the adults remained, the warmth of the fire chasing away the last of the night's chill. They knew that the forest had been a catalyst, a place where they had learned to face the darkness and come out the other side. But the forest was never far from their minds, a specter that hovered on the periphery of their lives. And when the wind whispered through the trees just right, they could almost hear the wailing spirits, a faint reminder of the night that had forever changed them. Yet they took comfort in the fact that they had faced the unknown together and lived to tell the tale. Their friendship, born in the crucible of fear, had become their shield, their beacon in the dark. As the years stretched on, the story grew in the telling, becoming a campfire legend passed from one generation to the next. And each time the tale was shared, the shadows grew longer, the creature more terrifying, and the stakes higher. Yet the core of the story remained the same, a group of friends who had dared to confront the darkness within themselves, and had emerged stronger for it. But as the friends grew old, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They could feel the forest calling them back, as if the creature in the cabin had not been vanquished, but merely biding its time, waiting for them to return. The mirror had shattered, but the reflections of their fears remained, buried deep within their hearts. One by one, the friends began to vanish, swallowed by the very shadows that had once haunted their dreams. The first to go was Mark, his disappearance as mysterious as the creature's emergence. Then Rachel, her house found empty and cold, with not a trace of struggle or sign of life. The police searched the woods, but the forest kept its secrets. The remaining friends gathered around the flickering embers of the campfire, their faces etched with lines of worry and grief. They knew the truth, that the horror of that night had never truly ended. It had only been lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to claim them once more. Their eyes met over the flames, and in that silent exchange, they made a pact. They would not let fear consume them, not again. They would stand together as they had done so many years ago, and face the darkness that had followed them from the woods. Armed with nothing but their flashlights and a determination forged by time and loss, they ventured back into the forest. The trees loomed tall, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, and the air was thick with a malice that seemed to cling to their very souls. The clearing lay ahead, the cabin a silent sentinel to the nightmares of their past. The door was open, the darkness within beckoning them to enter. They stepped over the threshold, their lights cutting through the gloom, their hearts pounding in unison. In the center of the room, the mirror stood, its surface a swirling vortex of their deepest fears. The creature waited, its eyes filled with a hunger that had not been satiated by their fleeing forms all those years ago. It was time for the final confrontation. Thomas took a step forward, his friends flanking him. "We're not running this time," he said, his voice steady. "We're facing it." The creature's eyes gleamed with malevolent anticipation as the friends approached. The shadows grew thicker, coalescing into the forms of their personal demons. Laura faced the creature that whispered her secrets, James confronted the embodiment of his doubt, and Alex stared down his own mortality. The battle was fierce, a dance of light and darkness that played out in the cramped space of the cabin. The mirror shimmered and cracked as their fears clashed against their will to survive. And as the sun began to rise, casting its first rays into the clearing, the friends stood victorious. The creature was gone, the mirror shattered once more. But the darkness lingered, a part of them forevermore. They left the cabin, the forest seeming to sigh with relief as they stepped out into the dawn. They had faced their fears and won, but the cost was high. The friends who had once laughed and shared stories around this very fire were now only 3. As they walked away, the forest grew quiet, the whispers of the spirits fading into the rustle of leaves. The horror story of Thomas and his friends had reached its climax, but the epilogue remained to be written. For the darkness within never truly leaves us. It merely waits for the next campfire to be lit, the next heart to be tested. The friends returned to their lives forever changed by their journey into the heart of fear. The forest had claimed some of them, but it had also set them free, teaching them the value of courage and the power of friendship. The campfire burned low, the embers glowing like the eyes of In the quiet, dusty village of Alhamara, a stooped figure shuffled through the narrow streets, a basket of withered herbs hanging from her arm. Her skin, a map of wrinkles etched by time and sun, bore witness to a life steeped in solitude and ancient wisdom. The villagers called her Kulthum, the Mother of Darkness, a title she wore with the same quiet dignity as the shawl that shrouded her from the world. They feared her, whispered about her in hushed tones, yet their fear was tinged with a desperate hope that only grew stronger as the whispers of evil grew louder. For months, the air had crackled with a malevolent energy that no one could ignore. Crops withered, livestock grew sickly, and children spoke of shadows that danced just beyond the candlelight. The elders gathered in the moonlit courtyard, sharing tales of the jinns that once plagued their ancestors. They knew that their village was in dire need of a savior. With trembling hands, they approached Kulthum's door, their pleas echoing through the night like a mournful chant. She had faced the darkness before, and they prayed she could do so again. Her eyes, once vibrant pools of life, now burned with a fierce resolve as she listened to their plight. The whispers of the jinns grew clearer, taunting her from the shadows of her mind. They had come for a reason, a vendetta against the living that only she could understand. She accepted the challenge, knowing full well that the path ahead was fraught with danger. Yet, the love for her people surged through her veins like a fiery elixir, pushing her to stand tall against the unseen forces that threatened to consume them all. The battle lines were drawn in the sands of time, an ancient dance of good and evil set to a rhythm of whispers and screams. Kulthum's house, once a bastion of quiet solitude, now hummed with arcane incantations and the scent of burning sage. She pored over dusty tomes, her gnarled fingers tracing the ancient symbols that held the key to their salvation. The pages whispered of ancient pacts and forgotten rituals, the only hope of banishing the malevolent spirits back to the abyss from which they had come. The villagers watched from afar, their hope a flickering flame in the face of the growing horrors that plagued their nights. The whispers grew to a cacophony as the jinns grew bolder. They slipped through the cracks in the walls, their icy breath a stark contrast to the sweltering desert air. They whispered sweet nothings of power and vengeance to any who would dare listen. Yet Kulthum remained steadfast, her resolve as unshakable as the rocks that surrounded their village. Her eyes never left the pages of her books, her mind racing to piece together the puzzle that would save them all. The first night of the purge was upon them. The moon hung low, casting an eerie glow upon the deserted streets. Kulthum stepped into the eye of the storm, a solitary figure clutching a staff carved from the heart of an ancient tree. The jinns howled in the wind, their shadows stretching like inky tendrils towards her. With a voice that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth, she called upon the ancient powers, her words a sacred incantation that had not been spoken in a millennia. The ground trembled, and a fierce sandstorm swirled around her, obscuring the nightmares that sought to claim her. As the tempest raged, Kulthum felt the weight of her task. Each spirit she confronted was a piece of the jigsaw puzzle, a test of her courage and her will. The jinns took many forms, from the terrifying to the seductive, but she saw through their illusions. With each banishment, she grew stronger, the whispers grew weaker, and the villagers' hope grew brighter. Yet she knew the battle was far from over. For in the heart of the storm, the king of the jinns awaited her, a creature of unspeakable power and malice. The final confrontation would be one for the ages, a duel of wills that would determine the fate of Al-Hamara. The night grew long, and the storm grew fiercer. The wind howled like a chorus of the damned, and the air was thick with the scent of fear. Kulthum marched through the village, her staff striking the ground with each step, leaving a trail of blue flame in her wake. She could feel the presence of the jinns, their cold fingers reaching for her, but she was protected by the ancient spells she had woven into her very being. The villagers had barricaded themselves in their homes, their faith in her a silent chant that fueled her resolve. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as she approached the village square where the Jinn King had made his lair. The square was a whirlwind of darkness, the sand twisting into monstrous shapes that clawed at the sky. At the center, a figure of shadow and malice loomed, its eyes gleaming like embers in the night. The Jinn King spoke to her, his voice a symphony of lies and temptation. He offered her power beyond imagination, a place at his side in the realm of the spirits. Yet Kulthum's heart was pure, her soul untainted by greed. She spat upon the ground at his feet, her voice clear and unwavering. "I reject your offer, creature of the void. You shall not claim these souls, nor shall you bend me to your will. I am the guardian of Al-Hamara, and I stand against you." The king's laughter echoed through the square, a sound that chilled the marrow of those who heard it. But Kulthum was not deterred. Drawing from the depths of her knowledge, she began the final incantation, her voice rising above the din of the storm. The jinns writhed in agony as the ancient words washed over them, their power waning under the onslaught of her righteous fury. The sandstorm grew to a crescendo, swirling into a tornado that threatened to rip the village apart. The moment of truth was at hand. Kulthum raised her staff high, her eyes flashing with the light of 1,000 stars. The incantation reached its climax, and with a thunderous roar, the Jinn King was torn from the fabric of their world, his screams lost in the fury of the storm. The darkness dissipated, leaving only the old woman standing tall amidst the wreckage of the square. The villagers cautiously emerged from their homes, their eyes wide with awe and relief. The whispers grew faint, a distant echo of what they once were. The jinns had been vanquished, the village saved. But Kulthum knew that this was not the end. The jinns were crafty, and they would return. Yet for now, Al-Hamara basked in the warm embrace of peace, and she had bought them precious time. With a weary smile, she turned to face her people, ready to teach them the ways of the ancient guardians, so they could stand against the shadows that would inevitably return. For she knew that the true battle was not in the realm of the spirits, but in the hearts and minds of the living. The days turned into weeks, and the whispers grew fainter still. The crops flourished, the livestock grew strong, and the children slept without fear. The villagers looked to Kulthum with newfound respect, their whispers now of gratitude and admiration. Yet she knew that the quiet was but the calm before the storm. The jinns would not rest until their vengeance was complete, and she would be ready when they returned. Her house, once feared, now became a place of learning, where the young and the brave gathered to hear her tales and to learn the ancient arts. The nights grew longer, and the shadows grew thinner. But in the heart of the desert, a spark of darkness remained, biding its time. The jinns had not forgotten their defeat, and they plotted their return, their malice festering like an open wound in the fabric of the world. And so, the cycle of fear and hope continued, the village living under the vigilant gaze of its guardian, the Mother of Darkness. The story of Kulthum and her battle against the jinns grew into legend, whispered around campfires, and passed from parent to child as a cautionary tale of bravery and the power of the unseen world. Yet, the whispers grew faint, as the village of Al-Hamara flourished under the protection of their guardian. Crops grew tall, and laughter once again filled the air, pushing back the shadows that had once haunted them. The old woman continued her vigil, her eyes never straying from the horizon, where she knew the jinns waited. One evening, as the sun dipped below the dunes and bathed the village in a warm embrace, a new whisper began. It grew from a gentle breeze to a persistent murmur that seeped through the cracks in the walls, a reminder of the darkness that had once reigned supreme. Kulthum felt the shift in the air, a cold prickle that danced along her spine. Her eyes grew sharp as she peered into the shadows, her senses honed by the lingering echo of the jinn's presence. The whispers grew stronger, and the villagers grew restless. They gathered around her, their eyes wide with fear and hope. "What does it mean, Kulthum?" they asked in hushed tones. She took a deep breath, her chest heavy with the weight of her knowledge. "The jinns have not abandoned their quest," she replied, her voice low and solemn. "Their master, the king, has merely retreated to plot anew. We must be vigilant, for the battle is far from over." The whispers grew to a cacophony of malice, a symphony of hatred that grew with each setting sun. The village children huddled closer to their parents, the adults casting worried glances at the horizon. Yet amidst the fear, a new generation of guardians was born. Under Kulthum's tutelage, the bravest among them learned the ancient incantations and spells that could hold the jinns at bay. They trained tirelessly, their spirits fueled by the tales of her triumph and the love for their home. The night of the second siege arrived, the moon a crimson eye that stared down upon them all. The jinns emerged from the desert, a tide of shadow and malice that engulfed the village. Yet the villagers did not cower. Armed with their newfound knowledge and the unyielding spirit of their mentor, they stood firm. The air grew thick with incantations as the guardians of Al-Hamara fought side by side, their voices a chorus that pierced the night. Kulthum, though weary, led the charge, her staff a beacon of light in the encroaching darkness. The battles were fierce, the jinns more cunning than before. They slipped through the defenses like smoke, seeking out the weak and the weary to feed upon their fears. But the villagers had learned from their guardian, and they faced the spirits with courage in their eyes. Each victory, however small, was a testament to Kulthum's teachings. The whispers grew faint once more as the jinns were driven back into the sands from which they came. Yet she knew that this was merely a reprieve, a temporary lull in the eternal struggle between light and dark. As the moon waned, so too did the threat of the jinns. Yet the whispers remain, a constant reminder of the ever-present danger. The villagers turned to Kulthum, their faces a tapestry of hope and trepidation. "We must build upon our success," she told them. "We cannot rest while the darkness still lingers." And so, the training intensified, the village children growing into warriors of the night, each one a living embodiment of the ancient guardians who had come before them. They patrolled the streets, their eyes peeled for any sign of the malevolent spirits that sought to reclaim their dominion. Kulthum grew older, her skin more parched by the desert winds, her eyes more piercing in the flicker of candlelight. Yet, her strength did not wane. If anything, her battles had imbued her with a power she had never known. The whispers grew faint, a mere echo of the fear that had once held the village in its thrall. But she knew that the jinns would not rest. They would bide their time, waiting for the moment when the village was at its most vulnerable. And when that day came, she and her disciples would be ready. The story of the Mother of Darkness became a beacon of hope in the night, a reminder that even the smallest flame could banish the darkest of shadows.